Jim Morrison predicted how long it would take us to schedule recording sessions. May take a week and it may take longer. But we're here now for the world's thriftiest music show, Courtesy Listen. Welcome to Courtesy Listen,
the podcast that explores an artist's entire catalog.
We'll listen to every studio album
and any other essential recordings,
sharing our thoughts along the way.
Some of those albums will be good,
and some will be bad, but they all deserve
a courtesy listen.
And we're back. Welcome back, Adrian. Good to be with you this evening.
You too, Tom. After what, 2, 3, 4 reschedule, something like that. We're back though. That's okay.
Pretty much the median number of rescheduling attempts, I think.
Yeah.
No, good to be back. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope you'll consider commenting, subscribing, liking, doing all the
things.
Various engagement practices. We're here to talk about the Doors today. This is our first real foray into 60s music, other than Led Zeppelin's Cup of Coffee in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll say up front, I don't plan to talk a whole lot about the sort of the research and like the history of the band, just because it's so well documented. You can and likely have at least heard or read some things about the band. There's a big budget movie starring Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison out there. There's disputes on how accurate it is, but nonetheless, it's there. You can learn about the Doors on your own time.
That movie, Tom, you know who, I didn't realize there was a movie until we did this. You know who played the organist, Ray? You know who played in the movie?
I saw it and it's escaped me.
It's Kyle.
Yes, from Twin Peaks.
No, from Sex and the City. Same guy, but I think of him from Sex and the City, and you likely think of him from Twin Peaks. But seeing that just made me laugh. I was like, this is an interesting casting. I may check that movie out or a snippet of it just to kind of see how it is. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I will say Val Kilmer's performance is incredible. The movie is worth watching for his performance. Again, it's widely disputed as to how accurate and how much Oliver Stone takes in terms of liberties with the story. Ray Manzarek hates the film, and we'll get to that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Also, John Densmore is played by Johnny Drama from Entourage. Anyways, but we'll go with some basics. The Doors were formed in L.A. in 1965. The legendary Jim Morrison on vocals, Ray Manzarek on keyboards, Robbie Krieger on guitar, and John Densmore on drums. No bassist, which has always bothered me and continues to bother me to this day.
Do you know how they do it?
What's that?
He had like a bass keyboard.
Yes, he did. It's insufficient.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But I do want to talk a little bit about my experience with Doors and then hear yours as well.
Sure.
I was a little more aware of them than I was other classic rock bands, just because they were a little more in popular culture in the 90s through various means that we'll get to, than some of the other bands were. They were very much like a Vietnam War era band. And if you watched any movies about the Vietnam War, chances were there was some Doors music or references in there. So I kind of knew it through that. I also just had a number of friends like in middle school who liked the Doors, oddly enough. But I didn't really get into them. Christmas of 98, my uncle got me Ray Manzarek's autobiography, Light My Fire. And I read it immediately and I got hooked. And I got really into the Doors. I went through this really intense Doors period.
It's interesting that it was not Jim Morrison that like your path in.
Well, it was.
Was it? Okay, well.
So I read this autobiography, but we had that bonus question a couple episodes ago of like which celebrities. I purposefully omitted Jim Morrison there because I went through this weird Jim Morrison phase, but it was very much a bit. Like I did a bit where I was sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, very into like his Lizard King stuff. But again, mostly because I
It's
saw it
gotten
on The
very deep very
Simpsons.
fast here.
Like Lisa does this thing where she calls herself the Lizard Queen. I thought it was very funny. And also, there was a Radiohead song on their first album where Tom York says, "I want to be Jim Morrison,"
uh,
and I don't think he meant that literally. I think it was just a thing he said in there. But
yeah.
these things all came together, and I went through this bizarre Jim Morrison phase. I think I wrote "I Am the Lizard King" in a lot of people's yearbooks that year. Uh, the less said
Comment
about it,
if you
better.
comment if you have a
Yeah,
yearbook that Tom has
yeah.
written. Let's hear it. Let's
Um,
hear about it. Yeah.
but over the years, it really started to feel silly. Just the whole Doors thing in general, and I really got away from them.
Yeah.
So this was my first time hearing a lot. There was some of it I've heard, but doing a deep dive into their catalog, this was the first time I had done that in a long time. So, how about you? I would love to hear your overall
Yeah.
take on the Doors.
I think I just knew the Doors as like a band from the 60s and I have never listened to any of these albums before in their entirety and have never really, learned anything about the band. I do remember in maybe, I guess it would have been seventh grade English class, maybe we had to like choose a piece of music. I don't know if it was specific to the 60s or whatever, but my group chose Break On Through as our like song to represent a maybe this was a history class. I don't remember. But our history teacher was like, no, that song is all about drugs. You cannot write about it for your seventh grade history class. Choose a different song. So I don't remember what song we chose instead, but I remember, choosing that song once. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. One last comment on Ray Manzarek's book. First of all, he's into all kinds of weird spiritual stuff in there that as a 16-year-old, I was like, what are you talking about? But he's also kind of a wife guy, like talks about his wife
Interesting.
constantly.
Well,
Um,
that's endearing.
it kind of is. It's cute. And then he has nothing kind to say about the other bands of that era. He goes
Oh,
through it. He's like, oh, the Rolling Stones, they were playing music that I used to play in my parents' living room when I was 15 and like
yeah.
all
Well,
this. I mean,
he's like
just
a he's like a
unloads on them.
real like
Yeah.
piano player. Like he's a
Yeah.
trained, right, musician.
Um,
So I could see where that could
so
come from.
anyway, I'm sure I'll make references to the book throughout. But
Okay, good.
with
I
that,
would.
we will get into the album journey here. We'll start with the self-titled "The Doors" in January of 1967.
Yeah.
Um, Largely regarded as an enduring classic, by the critics both of the time and today.
Hmm.
So, Adrian, I would love to hear your thoughts on The Doors.
Yeah. I would say that this is probably considered a classic because it has some of their biggest hits on it, right? So we have. If you're someone that's only knows one or two Doors songs, whether you know they're by the Doors or not, you're going to know Break On Through and you're going to know Light My Fire. Those are like the two
Yeah,
you're going to know. And those two are on this album. I love the opening to Break On Through, which is the first track on this album. It's such a
yeah,
great way to kick off an album. I love the organ part of Light My Fire. I think it's great. And I think throughout the catalog, I found myself like really focusing on the piano and the organ parts. So I think that is going to be a common thread for me. The End is the last song on the album and is like another well-known, culturally prominent,
yeah.
right, song. It's 10 plus minutes. We've gotten into some other bands of this time frame that are making these just ridiculously long songs, and I think like it should have been 3 minutes long and they should have cut it off. Like I think it just wears out his welcome. Not a fan. I did laugh. Alabama song, Whiskey Bar. It's like there's like a polka track there in the middle. So if you like psychedelic rock polka, this is the album for you.
Yeah. I mentioned the lack of a bass player on a lot of tracks on this album. The lack of bass is pretty glaring. There is again either it's Ray Manzarek on the sort of bass keyboard thing that he did with his
Hmm.
left hand, or I think they did have a session bass player who played on certainly on a lot of their albums. I think he played on at least some tracks here because there are some tracks where it's a little more prominent, but
Hmm.
some of these tracks are a little trebly for my taste, and I feel like especially with sort of the guttural like groan of Jim Morrison. You really need a little more low end in there.
Yeah, can we balance
Um,
that a little better? Right.
yeah, yeah. So there are some definite highlights to this album. Soul Kitchen is a great tune. Uh, Very much feels like a Vietnam War tune to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's, I think there's a scene in Forrest Gump where they're walking through the jungle and the keyboard intro to Soul Kitchen plays. It's a great song. Crystal Ship is an awesome song. I've always thought that was a great song. Um, you get into more like Jim Jim definitely has some songs in the catalog where he almost like croons a little
Mm.
bit, and that's
Yep.
one of his crooning tunes.
Yep.
I also really liked the I don't know if this was by design or not, but the fact that he says uh, 1,000 girls, 1,000 thrills, a million ways to spend your time, and 1,000 times 1,000 is a million. So I'm like, was he multiplying this in his head?
Oh,
Like, did he pick a million because it was 1,000 and 1,000?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. These are answers that we're probably never going to have.
Let's go with that. I'll vouch for that. That's a good explanation there.
They
As a former
also,
mathlete, I
yeah,
approve.
they also, the Doors kind of came in and out of the blues. Like they would get
Yeah,
bluesy at times,
absolutely.
and but there's tons and tons of their catalog that is not.
Right.
But like Backdoor Man, extremely bluesy.
Yeah.
It's probably my favorite track on the album. It's a great track. Like what Jim is doing vocally on that. I know I threw out the term unteachable when it comes to vocals a lot. I know I
Mm,
applied it to Stevie Nicks. That kind of
yeah.
thing's unteachable. He
Yeah.
like
Well, that
his
was
talent. Yeah,
an
that's
old blues
definitely an
song. You
old
like that's
an old blues
not
song.
their
Yeah,
song, but yeah,
right.
yeah. Well sung, Jim.
His interpretation of that is just incredible. Um, the end definitely a little long. I don't think it should be three
The
minutes
end.
though. Um, have you seen Apocalypse Now?
I have not, but I know
Okay,
that it is like prominent in
it's
that film.
yeah, it's inseparable from the movie for me, and it's very well
All 10 minutes
placed
of
in
it?
it.
All 10 minutes
I
of the
wouldn't. I
song?
mean, the film is like over 3 hours long, so yes,
Oh,
they could play it
yeah.
like 30 times. It's a little weird in parts, but I don't know. It's an interesting tune. It's not something that I'm necessarily trying to listen to often
Right,
or even
right.
semi often.
Ever?
But it's definitely a moody, neat, unique piece. My last take on this album is that I really don't like Light My Fire.
Really?
I think the
Is it too
solos.
popular?
No, I think the solos are garbage, man.
Mm,
And that's one thing from Ray Manzarek's book. They were really upset that radio stations wanted to cut this thing down to 3 minutes
mm-hmm.
and not. And I'm like, they did you a favor, man. They put money in your pockets because the kids were not going to sit there and listen to bum 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 bum
Yeah,
bum bum for 3 minutes. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that's just give me a break, man. But a great album, it really is. I'm splitting hairs here. And and the last thing I want to say, you mentioned Alabama Song, so that is taken from an opera, a German opera,
Oh,
uh, written by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill from I believe it was written in like the 1920s during the Weimar Republic, and it
interesting.
really just like it's like a criticism of like the sort of decadent lifestyles of the time, and so it's meant to be
That
uh,
explains
yes,
110% why it's a polka.
right.
Don't you
I believe
wonder
the name
how
of the
that
opera is the rise of the Mahogany City, something like that.
interesting? Don't you wonder how that like made its way? How did that get across Jim Morrison's desk? This like,
Yeah.
1920s German
Well,
opera?
they all went to UCLA Film School, and I'm sure
Oh,
it's the kind of
there
thing
was
that
homework.
they, yeah, right. So that was their first album, and then just 9 months later, September of 1967, we get the follow up, as was common at the time,
Yep. Crank
Strange
them out.
Days. So, Adrian, let's get your Strange Days
Yeah.
opinions.
This one you can tell maybe that they're only 9 months apart because it sounds very similar to the first album. They haven't really grown or changed or anything between the two. Um, we get kind of maybe some of the first bits of this like wild Jim Morrison poetry bit. in Horse Latitudes.
Oh
Yeah,
God.
yeah. Just wait. There's
Yeah.
more. Yeah. I think this album to me, I could really pass on all of it, except I really enjoyed When the Music Is Over, which is another 10-minute closing track. So they love these 10-minute closing tracks. Has these really nice instrumental bits, and it isn't kind of too overpowered by crazy vocals and wild lyrics and all of that. So yeah, this album was a quick once through and never again for me.
Hmm.
But I did enjoy When the Music Is Over. What about
Yeah.
you, Tom? What do you think of this one?
So that's interesting because generally this is considered to be weaker than its predecessor. And I think a lot of the songs were written at the same time, you know,
Mm,
and they used a lot of the stronger songs for their debut and then the leftover songs for this to an
yeah,
extent. I think
this
that's kind of the I don't know that for a fact, but I think that's kind of like what the prevailing opinion of this
right.
album
Well, and
is.
we've seen that time and time again with other
Yeah.
bands and other at other times in their careers, so that's easy to assume.
Yeah. Now, I actually think the highlights of this album are better, in my opinion, than the previous, than their previous album. However, back to front, I mean, The Doors is a better album.
Mm, yes.
The opener, though, Strange Days, we finally get some bass. That bass line goes hard.
Hmm.
What an awesome song. You get that, yeah, which is, I
Yeah.
mean, people weren't shouting like that back then. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Jim was really bringing the shouting to rock music, and I gotta respect that. It's just a really eerie song. Jim Morrison's lyrics are all over the place. You have moments of
Yes.
brilliance, and then you have many more moments of
Tons.
what's the opposite of brilliance? Uh, Whatever it
not,
is.
not even stupidity, but like
Yeah,
it's like
just like
someone who's like, oh, this is really
yeah,
deep. They're gonna love this, and it's like,
right.
you're so far off the mark and you don't realize it.
Um, but that line at the end of the second verse, that hear me talk of sin and you know this is it, like just the way you say, like, oh my god, like raises the hair on the back of my neck. It's
Mm,
so cool. Um, there's a great, almost kind of a cover of this by the rapper Tech Nine, where the
mm.
band was actually involved, like in the studio with him. Um, Definitely worth checking out. And he actually wanted to sample People Are Strange, and Robbie Krieger was like, actually, Strange Days is a much better beat. And he was like, all right, let's go with
Interesting.
that then.
Yeah.
So I really like
I
that. Love Me Two Times is such a good song. One of my favorite Doors tracks. That bop 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 bop
hmm
bop. It's so good. And Jim singing on it, he makes just great choices on it, and how he gets loud at the end. Only my only qualm with that song is the harpsichord that Ray Manzarek chooses. Like, why wouldn't you do like a sort of like this ragtime piano type thing, like
He's trying new
harpsichord?
things.
Why?
They've got to like pull out the big guns here for album
Ah,
two, right?
it just like
Everything
it
else is
bothers me
like
so
a
much. Aerosmith, great cover. Hard to find, but great cover of this song. Um, you mentioned Horse Latitudes,
yeah.
and I made a note for that one. I feel like sometimes bands on their albums self sabotage, and they're just like, I'm going to put this thing on that nobody's going to like because I can,
Yeah.
You think of like the Beatles Revolution #9, or no, or is it Her Majesty? What's the last track on Abbey Road?
That I don't know.
Yeah, that
That's a
like
you
17
question.
seconds, like Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl. Just bands who are just like, I'm gonna make this album actively
Yeah.
worse, and
Well,
that's what Horse
or
Latitudes is.
they've kind of made it a little bit, right? Like we can't put that on the first album, but
Mm-hmm.
now people are kind of interested in them, and it's like, hey, I kind of have this one that I really want to sneak on there, right? Like now they have
Yeah,
some kind of social capital that they can use to get their stuff in there, even if it is as terrible as Horse Latitudes.
yeah. When the Music's Over is a much easier 10-minute listen than the
Yes.
end. Obviously, it does not have any of the cultural significance of the former, but certainly easier to get through. So
Yeah.
all in all, I thought this is a pretty solid album. I'm probably a little higher on it than most, but definitely some tracks. We didn't even mention "People Are Strange." That's
No.
a great song too.
Yeah. And that's one that people will know, right?
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
don't, I don't know the Doors. Yeah, you do. You know that song.
Right.
from like a Halloween commercial or something these days.
Anything else on Strange Days?
No, I was
All
done with
right.
Strange Days 2 seconds after I stopped listening to it. So,
Well, then we will shift forward to about 10 months later, July 1968, a quiet period in our nation's history, to Waiting for the Sun, their third album. This was actually released July 3rd, 1968, exactly 3 years to the day before the death of Jim Morrison.
mm,
Spoiler alert, if you didn't know, Jim did die quite young. And we'll get
yep,
there.
yep.
But Adrian, let's hear your review on Waiting for the Sun.
Yeah, this one I think had some really cool variations, which I really enjoyed. This was a solid album for me. I like this one. See, what do we have? We have this like beautiful organ part in Wintertime Love that is really great. Then we get classical guitar solo in Spanish Caravan. Then we get this like really simple, quiet piano. Yes, the River Knows on simple guitar solos. So those were really nice to me. 5 to 1, you get this great guitar solo in the closing track, right? So all of
So
this,
good.
yeah, so good. I really enjoyed this album, mainly because of the musical parts and not so much the lyrics or the lyricist.
Yeah. This one's a little all over the place for me. I think the high points are very high.
Hmm.
It does have some things that I would consider to be like filler or just not
Yeah.
really what I'm like. Hello, I Love You. I know it was a hit for them. I can't stand it. I've never
Mm.
liked that song. I also like so Not to Touch the Earth is the Lizard King song, and it's just kind of silly. Um, However, Love Street, absolute banger. Love
Mm.
Street is a great tune. Great spoken word performance in the middle of that by Jim.
Hmm.
Um, Unknown Soldier is an incredible song. That interlude in the middle, you would think would be dumb. It's not. It's actually, I mean, it comes off as pretty cool to me,
Hmm.
especially because Jim Morrison's father was one of the central figures on the American side in the Vietnam War. He was an admiral in the
Interesting.
Navy and was like way like had command of the Pacific Fleet. I think at one point I might
Wow.
be overstating to a slight degree, but was a very prominent figure. And you know, we have this anti-war anthem in
Yeah, I was
Unknown
gonna
Soldier
say.
from his son.
I wonder what
Um,
their like Thanksgiving dinner conversations were like, right?
yeah, yeah. You mentioned Spanish Caravan. That's a cool song.
Hmm.
It's got kind of a Jethro Tull feel to it to me.
I could see that. Okay, yeah.
And then we got to spend some time on 5 to 1
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
5 to 1 is the Doors song that I heard when I was like 16, and I was like, "This is the best band in the world." You know what I mean? 5 to 1 would is pretty high up there. It's my favorite Doors song, and it's pretty high up there on my list of favorite songs in general. Like I think that is an amazing song.
Yeah.
Um,
And
there are so many great things about it.
is that because of when you like found it? It had such an effect on you? Is it because of the song itself?
I
Like
think,
if you heard it just now for the first time, would you
yeah,
still be like, this is the greatest? Or are you like,
it's hard to know. I
yeah.
think there's definitely a part of it that like 16-year-old me was drawn to. It's a very violent song, like, and I
Mm,
think it kind of we haven't talked too much to this point about sort of the hippie movement and what the Doors' importance was in that. I think to an extent for their first few albums, I think this song kind of shows why Jim Morrison was not an ideal face for that
mm-hmm,
movement. Is because he is quite volatile,
mm-hmm.
and really was pro. This is a pretty violent song. It's just one of those moments though where they're just recording at the right time. I mean, I don't know how many takes of this song they did in the studio, but gosh, they captured the right one.
Yeah.
Even just like you hear people in the background throughout like doing like
Mm-hmm.
like whooping and going, yeah, like
Yep.
chattering in the background.
Yep.
It's just perfect.
Yeah.
His spoken word stuff in this song is so good. It just feels like it's almost like ad libs in rap music.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just comes it really adds to the song and just the feeling of it.
Yeah.
um
And this is like a big, this is one of their well-known songs. It's a favorite for many people. So the people agree with you, Tom.
yeah, yeah. And I think this really, I wanted to take a moment and talk about some of the influences of the Doors. I sent you a couple of links today, and I was like, listen to these guitar solos, because there are multiple guitarists who, I mean, lifted
Who
the guitar
tried?
solo
Yeah, yeah,
directly out of here.
yep.
Uh, Notably, Ace Frehley from Kiss in the song "She."
Hmm.
That is note for note the guitar solo
Yep.
from 5 to 1.
Do you think people had to have realized that at the time when they hear Kiss playing it, they know where it's
Yeah.
from.
Oh yeah, because
It's not
that's
like an
pretty. That was
unknown
only about
tune.
five. Yeah, that's probably 6 7 years later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean it's directly lifted. And then I also sent you "Alive" by Pearl Jam. Mike McCready does that really long solo at the end,
Hmm.
which is it's not quite the same, but it's
Yeah,
definitely the same phrase
sure.
is used in it.
Yeah, he's heard
Um,
this before, and definitely.
that bum 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 that yeah that appears in quite a few guitar solos. So it's easy to see through
Hmm.
this, I think, how many guitarists were influenced by Robbie
Yeah,
Krieger. And of course, I didn't really in the top, up top talk about how who or how Jim Morrison influenced people, but I think it's pretty clear how many vocalists and frontmen, just off the
oh
top
yeah,
of my head,
are
a
emulating
few.
him.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like Ian Astbury of the Cult. We will. I'm a big Cult fan, so we will be doing a Cult episode at some point. That one's obvious. And Ian Astbury actually fronted the Doors many years later when they were just touring, because I mean his voice is basically identical.
Yeah, well,
But
he
also, I
probably modeled
think,
it, right? Modeled
yeah.
it off of Jim Morrison.
But it's interesting to me because I feel like once grunge came along, a lot of those guys were taking from Jim Morrison or drawing inspiration from him. I think Eddie Vedder, just in his stage
Yeah,
presence draws a lot. Scott Weiland, absolutely. And,
absolutely.
and,
Yeah,
and the way he sings very
yeah.
much. Mark Lanigan from Screaming Trees. I even think like Marilyn Manson. I don't think there'd be a Marilyn Manson without Jim Morrison. Like I really think his stage persona is like Jim Morrison dialed up to like 11
Yeah,
with all this
yeah,
other stuff.
yeah.
Um,
Or with some of that crazy Jim Morrison stuff that kind of gets
right.
tucked aside and tucked
Yeah. And
aside.
that's the other thing. Yeah, we didn't get into that really. He had a lot of off the stage issues and on the stage issues. Some of his legal issues stemmed from his on
Yeah,
stage
from stuff he
behavior.
was shouldn't have been doing out in public.
Yes. So, but yeah, I think 5 to 1 really encapsulates sort of what people found intriguing about the Doors, what their contributions to music were overall, because it just, that song got copied and built upon for decades to come, and rightfully so. It's an incredible song.
And did they do it justice? Like these guitarists that you mentioned now. What do you
I
think? Or did they like? Is it just like shouldn't have even touched it? You're sullying the name of Five to
I
One.
actually like both of those songs. I think
Okay.
"She" is a decent song. "Alive" is a great song, and I think "She" is it's a little close, in terms of like you probably should have changed it up a little bit. I actually think like what Mike McCready is doing in "Alive," I think is more paying homage,
Hmm.
and I think he takes that phrase and builds upon it in a way that's interesting. So I don't see an issue. We will go a full year. They waited a full
Wow.
12 months, which is an
They had to
eternity,
rest.
for their fourth album, The Soft Parade. So Adrian, let's hear your Soft Parade thoughts.
Yeah, Soft Parade. This one, this one again was kind of iffy for me, but it did have good moments. It had good moments. Running Blue, that track I really enjoyed. It's all over the place though, right? It's crazy. You have like kind of normal rock and roll, then we're gonna throw in a horn section, then gonna go back to normal rock and roll for a bit, then we're going to bluegrass for a while, right? And I think they did each of those different styles well. I liked it. So yeah, Running Blue was a good one for me. My favorite track on that album though was Wishful Sinful, which had
Mm.
this orchestra, which I don't think we have had in the other tracks up until that point. And it sounded a bit like a Nick Drake tune to me. Like if you're in the autumn around here, we play a lot of Nick Drake. That's like fall, right? And that Wishful Sinful sounded very similar to me as that. Let's see. This one I could totally put on as, background music around the house and listen to this. And I think I could see myself doing that. However, we hit the title track at the end. We hit Soft Parade at the end, and Jim just can't help himself. He's put out this beautiful album of beautiful music, and here we are screaming and, this weird preacher kind of dialogue happening. So totally kills the vibe. But overall, I really like Soft Parade. I would look for this one on vinyl, and I would just quickly stop it before we get to that last track every time. What about you, Tom? How do you stand on this album?
Well, this album was critically just destroyed at the time. The
Really?
critics hated this album. It was incredibly expensive. It took them forever to record. The hippies were done with them at this point.
They were tired of
I
waiting. It was too long, 12 months.
Yeah. Now, we've previously established that I enjoyed reading music reviews. This is another one that I was influenced by, and I never listened to because
Mm,
I read so many reviews and I was sure I
hey,
would hate it.
they told you
So the
not to.
only song I knew off of this was Touch Me, which of course was a hit.
Yeah.
And Touch Me is great. This is a shockingly good album. I
Yeah,
really
it's a
like this
great
album.
album. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so mad I didn't listen to it before. Tell All the People kind of has like a James Brown thing going on,
Hmm.
which I liked. Running Blue. You mentioned all these different parts. You know what it has on it.
No.
It has
What does it
Bob
have?
Dylan voice. The
Does
bluegrass
it?
part has Bob Dylan voice.
Oh,
I feel
listen, I pulled out Bob Dylan voice on a different later album, but that's
oh
funny. I'll have
boy.
to go back and listen to it.
Um, I feel like we need like a Pee Wee's Playhouse thing for like the word of the day. Anytime Bob Dylan's voice comes out, we all run around. Like I just,
Or like a little
I start. I
the
mean,
hat,
I
like the hat
laughed.
that he always wears for the hat on your head.
I laughed so hard when they get to the bluegrass part. And I don't know if that's Jim. That might be Robbie Krieger singing that part because it sounds so different. Um,
Interesting.
I'm going to have to disagree with you, though. Jim's spoken word at the beginning of the Soft Parade is awesome.
You
It's
think?
it's his best spoken word
Oh man.
performance in the entire catalog. I love it. I love that part. I think it's so awesome. And the Soft Parade's a good tune. It's another really lengthy closing track.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was kind of blown away by this album. I was
Yeah.
shocked how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was a good one.
So that brings us. They would not stay out of the studio long. About 8 months later, in February of 1970, we get Morrison Hotel. Um, Adrian, what'd you think of Morrison Hotel?
Yeah, Morrison Hotel. This is the one that you always see popping up at the record store. I feel like I've seen this one the most out of all of them. This one was, I don't know, but are there many of their big hits on this one? I don't have the list in front of me, but Roadhouse Blues is a good track. Again, you mentioned their blues stuff that they pull out every so often. That's a great example of it. Peace Frogs, we have Peace Frogs, which the music is great. You get into some of the weirder spoken word and kind of stuff happening in that track, which we will see that snippet show up again in American Prayer down the road. But Peace Frogs, this did make me laugh. We all know Peace Frogs t-shirts. Do you know this? Like the Peace Frogs brand t-shirts. I had to Google, like, does it have anything to do with the Doors? Like, did they base it off of this? So just was funny to me picturing, Jim Morrison trying to sell tie-dye t-shirts. But Ship of Fools we have is kind of like verging on Boogie Woogie, but is a good song. I enjoyed that. And Queen of the Highway, Ray Manzarek again has this incredible organ part in Queen of the Highway that I really appreciate. So yeah, this was a good album. It wasn't particularly memorable, but it also wasn't like, ugh, turn that off, right? So it kind of is like a forgotten middle ground for me.
Yeah, I mean, it really feels like an attempt to kind of get back to their roots after Soft Parade. Like I think they wanted to show folks that they could still make music, because I think a lot of people thought Soft Parade was pretentious, and they were like,
Mm,
no, that, we can still
yeah,
put out something that's more rootsy
yeah.
and such. You mentioned Roadhouse Blues. That's an all-timer. Great
Hmm.
tune. They really rock on that song. They don't rock often enough for my taste. I think that's
Yeah.
one of my
But when
bigger
they
qualms with
do
them.
it
But when they do,
well.
they do.
Yeah.
Robbie Krieger's solo on it, it's amazing. Okay, Roadhouse Blues leads me to a trivia question for you.
Oh my.
At Woodstock '99, and on the CD commemorating Woodstock '99,
Okay.
a contemporary band, covered Roadhouse Blues with Robbie Krieger guesting on guitar.
Oh,
Who was it?
I have. Who would do that? Red Hot Chili Peppers. I have
Well, that
no
would have been
idea.
interesting. No, it wasn't them.
Who who was it? Was
It
it
was
Smashing
Creed.
Pumpkins?
Creed.
Creed. Oh my God, get them
Yes,
off the
with
stage.
Robbie Krieger. It's pretty
How
good.
is
It's pretty
it?
good. Yeah.
In
Um,
Scott Stapp, that's Creed, right? Is
yes,
that yeah,
clearly
he
influenced by Jim
definitely was
Morrison.
influenced by Jim
Yeah.
Morrison. Absolutely. Put him top of the
Um,
list.
you didn't mention Waiting for the Sun. They do the thing where they take, a previous album title and make it
Oh,
the track
the
on a later
track.
album, just
Yep.
like Houses of the Holy.
Hmm.
That's a good tune though. Waiting for the Sun's a neat tune. Peace Frog is the best song on the album. Um,
Yeah.
this was one that I can remember somebody in my eighth grade class talking about, which in hindsight I'm shocked. That person, she remains a friend and has always had excellent taste. Awesome solo, the best bass line in the Doors catalog
Yeah.
by
There's
far.
not many to choose from, so I'm
No, there's
glad you
not.
found the
That's
one.
true.
Yeah.
Weird spoken word part, but the
Yeah.
actual verses are really cool. Like I
Yeah.
think, and the chorus and everything, like it's a great tune. Side B leans heavier into the blues, and I think it
Hmm.
shows kind of what direction they were heading. Good album, I think.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
album. And that will bring us to actually a 14-month layoff, which for the Doors is a hibernation, basically. LA Woman, April of 1971. During the recording of this, their longtime producer, Paul Rothschild, quit because he hated the way it sounded.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they
And
the,
they
the
wouldn't
band
change
the
it.
band can't
They
agree
wanted to
on
go
whether or not
different
he was.
ways.
Yeah, he was listed. He walked out either during "Love Her Madly" or "Riders on the Storm." The band can't agree on which track he hated that much, but
Maybe he walked out on both of them at,
it may
different
have.
points in time if it were
Yeah.
that bad. Yeah. Yeah, this album for me, LA Woman. Yeah, it was like it was a solid album. It was generally inoffensive, kind of like Morrison Hotel before. I feel like this was mostly forgettable. Like it's not anything too out there or too interesting necessarily to me. So I think Riders on the Storm is the best track on this album, or the one that I enjoyed the most. But otherwise, I don't have a lot to say about it.
Hmm. I'm surprised because as bluesy as this album is, I thought you would love it.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just all kind of blah. And maybe, the fact that maybe if I went back and listened to it and actually like focused on this and weren't multitasking or something, but I feel like it was just all kind of background lull and nothing worth, pulling to the front of your memory.
So I saved this album for. I was in Long Beach for work, and I walked around Long Beach to see if it would like enhance the experience. It didn't. Um, I I think it's a good album. It was really hailed as a return to form by
Hmm.
them and like sort of a comeback. Um, and there was a lot of like within the band. I think they really felt like, hey, this is the best place we've been in a few years, and
Yeah.
they were. Of course, Jim had been struggling with addiction for a while now, and there was a feeling that he was going to turn a corner and stuff. And he had gone to France to try and get away from it all for a bit.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. I think very bluesy. The big hit was "Lover Madly." I really misinterpreted this song. Um,
Really?
I really thought that this because we mentioned like how sort of the hippies. I feel like they kind of turned their backs on the band, like and I always felt like I interpreted this as Jim Morrison kind of making fun of
Mm.
what he perceived to be like the average hippie man, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Turns out Robbie Krieger wrote this song about himself because his wife left him. Um,
Oh, well, maybe he was the average hippie man.
right. But I always thought this was Jim, like just, sort of eviscerating
Yeah,
hippies,
yeah.
So that was entirely in my head. Apparently not. I
Interesting.
still like my interpretation better. I think it's a good song. Always makes me think of Forrest Gump. Gosh, there's a lot of the
Mm.
Doors in Forrest Gump,
Yeah,
apparently.
yeah.
Um, Riders on the Storm, really long. Always feels like it's going to pick up, but never does. And I hadn't heard it in forever. And in my mind, I was like, I thought this gets loud at one point. Like I thought that
No.
part, the girl you gotta love your man. I
Hmm.
always thought he got shouty there, and then I realized I was thinking of a cover version I had heard
Uh,
years ago by
by
Creed.
what?
I
Did they do a
look,
whole album?
this is a
Oh my
Creed
gosh.
podcast now.
No, no.
The
I will not
Creed
be
covered
circling back to those and looking those up to
Creed covered
hear
this
those.
song as well. This one is not as. I went back and listened to the Creed cover. Yeah, it's not good. Um,
Interesting.
Roadhouse Blues is a little better. Um, I also really like Hyacinth House because I think
Mm.
that's sort of like the dreamy thing that
Yeah.
again you can hear Scott Weiland like where he came like what influenced him and stuff like Hyacinth House.
Hmm.
So I really like that. But I like this album. It's not their best. I do think it's interesting to listen to and think about like what would have come next because I think they could
Things
have
they
built
were
upon it.
changing and they
I think the production just now that it's 1971 and recording it sounds. I mean, their albums are starting to sound progressively better. I mean, obviously,
right.
Soft Parade, is well produced because they spent so much money on it. But
Hmm.
this one too, it's just higher quality production because the
Yep.
technology's getting better,
Yep.
and it would have been interesting to see what they did going forward.
Right.
Sadly, 3 months or so after this album, not even 3 months after this album,
Hmm.
Jim Morrison died in Paris under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
The
I mean, is
band
there
would
really
choose to
mystery
go
about it?
on. What was that?
There's no mystery. I mean, we feel. Do you feel like there really is mystery around how he died, or like
It's it's
he drugs?
it's pretty crazy though that like the local hospital basically was just like wrote just like natural cause. I think they wrote his heart stopped on his death certificate, and they buried him basically with like I think one member of the Doors management team and like a few people. They didn't tell anyone.
Right.
It was really bizarre. But yeah, I mean, clearly he had abused many substances, and I don't think it was necessarily, I don't mean mysterious
Entirely.
circumstances that there was
Yeah.
foul play or anything
Yeah.
like that. I
Yeah.
mean, he lived hard, you know.
Yeah.
But the band would choose to carry on for a time, and in October '71, we get Other Voices. So let's hear your opinion on these other voices, Adrian.
Sure. Other voices. I feel like Jim passing on and then the band continuing without him. I feel like they were able to do more with this album, the remaining members of the Doors, than they had in previous albums. I feel like the music really had more of a focus in the balance between the lyrics and the music, and I really enjoyed it. There's some really great arrangements in there. Wandering Musician, you hear that, and that's mostly instrumental and is a really, I think that's a fabulous tune. There's this trippy opening to Eye of the Sun with the organ and the bass drum that are starting out, and I think that's a great opening. Love that one. This is the album, Tom, where I thought that we had Bob Dylan voice. This was it for me. On Yeah, one of these songs, I was like, this sounds like the Stones, and this sounds like Bob Dylan voice. So I thought this was the album that we got it. What about you? What do you think about this
That's
one?
the possibility of Bob Dylan voice is the only thing that could get me to ever listen to this album again. This was so
Really?
bad.
Oh
Um,
no.
I don't want to judge how they chose to grieve because
No,
I'm
no.
sure going
This
right
was a
back into the
great album.
studio
I'm gonna fight you on
was
this.
I'm sure it was cathartic for them. I don't think Jim could have saved these songs. Like these songs are just don't really have much going on. Like Down on the Farm is embarrassingly bad. That song is horrible. The most listenable is probably In the Eye of the Sun, the opening track.
Hmm. See, you
But
think
also,
they
these
needed
guys,
you think they needed Jim to save them. I think Jim was doing them a disservice
these guys
in
couldn't
the
sing.
past. No, no, the singing is horrible. All of my commentary, yes, you are correct. They couldn't sing. Who did sing? It was them. It was just the remaining members
It
on these
was
albums.
so Robbie and Ray alternated on
Yes.
different songs. Ray has a slightly better voice, but he's really kind of doing a Jim Morrison
Yeah.
impression on the bluesier stuff, and it just
Yeah.
it's bad.
Oh, I guess that's a small caveat, right? Like I really like this album, except for any of the vocals. So yes, I'll give you that. But I'm really shocked by that. I wonder if you went back and you listened to it and you, with the thought in mind of like, I just know the vocals are going to be bad. How does it sound otherwise? I wonder if you would enjoy it more.
I don't know. Uh,
And you're not
this is
willing to
one.
try.
If this was if this was $1 on First Friday, I would keep the dollar.
You were gonna buy, what were you gonna buy last time? That
Door to
terrible Cars
door.
album, Door to Door.
I
You said you would buy
I
it
would take door to
for
door over this 100
$5.
times. Yes.
No, terrible. All
Um,
right, well then there you
well,
go.
they undeterred from this experience. July of 1972, this Doris trio would put out another album,
Mhm,
Full Circle.
mhm.
Adrian, your thoughts?
Full circle. Yeah, I thought that again, maybe the vocals aren't the best, but the opening track on this, Get Up and Dance, is such a hokey, it's so stupid. It's like there's like bad clapping that's like off the beat and kind of a clompy piano part, but I think it's a really fun song. I really like it. And I'm like, what do I don't like that I like this, but I do, But so I was judging myself for that one. I thought that was great. And I really enjoyed the song. You're going to laugh at me. I really did enjoy Vertilac until I was like, what the hell's a Vertilac? And you look it up, it's a vampire. It's a song about a vampire. And then after that, I was like, well, maybe I don't like it so much. But yeah, I thought that was a fun track. It's a fine album. It's you can tell that they're kind of, maybe their ship has gone a little astray without, Jim Morrison as the rudder holding it all together. But I assume you were not a fan of this one.
Oh gosh, this was so bad. I wrote in my notes, there is no reason for this album. Um, it's crazy. The Mosquito
Oh yeah.
actually charted. It was like number 60 on the US. That song is so
Huh.
bad. It was like number 60 on the Billboard Hot 100.
Why?
Inexplicable.
It's like the chicken dance or something, right? Like, why
It's
did people like it?
just just the dirt worst, man. Vertilac, I wrote down, was actually the only song on this that I kind of liked.
Yeah.
It's kind of got like a jazz fusion thing going on,
Yep.
and it features a searing saxophone solo.
Yes.
Um, and it made me think, I was like, wow, they could have just been an instrumental band with a saxophonist and like put out a whole album of this, and I would have kind of enjoyed it. Yeah, this, I don't know, man. I can't get
Yeah, I
on
didn't
board
say
with
it
this
was their
one.
best. Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
over between Other Voices and Full Circle, I would choose Other Voices. If I had to just take the trio, between the trio, I would take Other Voices.
That will bring us to the final stop on our journey. They would go their separate ways after this, but then they would come back together in 1977 to release An American Prayer, where it would feature Jim Morrison, his spoken word performances, through his poetry, and the Doors, the surviving member of the Doors, recording original music and some old music recordings of that to support this performance. So kind of an unorthodox means of creating a new album. Opinion at the time was very all over the place on this. Some people liked it, some people absolutely hated it. So,
Well, rightfully so. I mean, for both
Adrian,
of them, right? It has
yeah,
it has its ups and downs. There were a few tracks that I kind of enjoyed on this. Ghost Song is kind of this
Yes.
interesting like funk
Yes.
track,
Yep.
which is so new, right, from anything else they've done. I would listen to that without Jim over the top, like just give me the music again, like the same as the past two albums. And then I also liked Newborn Awakening, which I thought was funny. I was like, oh, I know this song, Newborn Awakening. Spotify had, served it to me on a playlist somewhere at some point in time, but hearing it in line with Dawn's Highway, which is the like poetry backstory to the song, is Dawn's Highway is so terrible, and you're like, what in the world is going on? That actually like killed my enjoyment of the song after hearing the poetry version of it. So I don't know. This album, not for me. I wonder if this would have, been put together like this and released like this if Jim were alive, how he would have changed it or wanted his poetry represented differently. But yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Not always a good thing, but interesting, right?
Yeah. So I have to go back. I think at the end of the Cars episode, I said something to the effect of, well, we have to listen to American Prayer because it's an official Doors release.
Yeah.
I would like to retract that statement and say we did not, in fact, have to listen
Uh,
to American Prayer. This was bad. Um, First of
it had
all,
good moments though.
it
There were
did.
they were few and far between, but
What it comes down to is Jim Morrison's not a good poet. He's really not. As you indicated, some of the backing music is good. The backing
yeah.
music on Ghost
Well,
Song
they're
is
great
awesome.
musicians. These guys are great
Um,
musicians.
the backing music on Black Polished Chrome is good. I also didn't like how they kind of like took parts of Peace Frog and sort of
Mm.
interspersed it throughout. It just felt like kind of filling out the album runtime. But beyond that, like it's not just that it's silly or ridiculous. Like there's some pretty objectionable stuff on here
Oh
that
yeah.
Jim says,
Yeah,
and
you could not
I would
release this
not.
album
And I just
today. Absolutely not.
there's no point to it though. You know what I mean? Like there is some art that is whatever explicit for a reason, like it's making a point or something like that. There are no
Hmm.
points being made here.
Hmm.
It just comes off as like trying to shock people for no reason, like Marilyn Manson. This is basically
Yeah.
the Marilyn Manson of
Yeah.
its time.
Yeah.
um I can't in good conscience recommend this to anyone. I'm really trying to avoid like needless pearl clutching, but just like you listen to it, you're like, come on, man, like
Right.
grow up.
Right.
Anyway, don't give this one a courtesy listen.
No, that one doesn't deserve it.
That completes our walk through the discography of the Doors, and that brings us to top three, bottom one. So, Adrian, let's start with your number three.
Number three, there's an asterisk on this one. Number three would be, and I mentioned this before, Soft Parade minus Soft Parade. So I
Mm,
want that album with the title track removed. That would be my third choice.
okay.
Your third?
Um, Number three for me is Strange Days. Like I said, the highlights are really high. Only real downside is Horse Latitudes. The rest of it is, it's a quick album. It's
Hmm.
an easy listen.
Okay, good choice. Let's see. My second choice, you're going to hate me for this one, or you're going to hate this choice. My second choice would be Other Voices.
Oh, that's
Uh,
just oh my
I,
gosh.
it's a great album musically. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Yeah.
Man.
I want that on vinyl. I'm going to be looking for that one.
Mm.
Your
Wow.
second
Okay.
choice?
Number
Is it also
two.
Other Voices?
It's not. Number two is Waiting for the Sun. Couple low points on the album, but the highlights are so high. I mean, it's got 5-1, which is an all-time favorite song of mine. So it's got to make the top three, and I nudge it above Strange Days just because the peaks of this album are a little higher.
Hmm. Okay. Uh, well, we are in unison on this. My number one was Waiting for the Sun. So yeah, I agree. Great album, and I'll be looking for that one as well. But I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that one, and I would come back and listen to that again. Which some of these other albums, I won't be doing that.
Number one, I didn't go into this exercise wanting to put this number one, but the Doors self-title is number
Yeah.
one. It's just too significant of an album, and front to back, I mean, it's got the least amount of filler. It really is an experience to listen to that album. I mean, there's just so much on there that's um, interesting musically. Even Light My Fire, which I don't really like that much. It's still there are parts of that song that are interesting. So yeah, it had to be number one. I wanted to put Waiting for the Sun number one, but I would have been lying to myself. Bottom one, I know what it's
Oh,
going to be.
yeah. We can just say it on three. It's American Prayer.
American Prayer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
There you
American
go.
Prayer is absolutely bottom one. Bottom one of any bottom
Yeah.
one we've
No,
done
yeah.
thus far.
Is it the worst album of all?
That
Of
we've that
everything we've
on
listened
our
to? Yeah.
journey.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It
got to be.
absolutely is.
It's worse
Yeah.
than Coda. Um, we know.
Perdita. It's worse than Perdita.
No,
Uh,
you didn't put Perdita as your bottom one. You put High Rise, just like I did. And
oh,
yes, it's worse than High Rise.
okay. Well,
Um,
yeah, I mean, this one, there's nothing to be said to be said now that we haven't already said.
yeah, agreed. So that'll bring us to our bonus question. And
Oh,
this is kind of a hard one, but I'll pitch it to you first. Let's say the Doors in 1971 decided to go on with a new singer. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten the brilliance of other voices in Full Circle, but gosh, uh, they go on with a new singer. Who would you pick for their new singer?
okay. So I didn't quite follow your prompt 100%, which you'll probably sorry, I'm going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I chose from all time. I'm not choosing from 1971. I just kept, as I'm listening to these albums, kept seeing Seth MacFarlane from Family Guy creation, right? Singing these songs, like that crooning voice. You mentioned earlier how he was a crooner. I don't know, something about Jim Morrison's voice. I could not get past thinking like Seth MacFarlane is singing these songs. So I know I took your question
Interesting.
in a total opposite direction. But
Not the way I would have
yeah,
gone.
no, not at all.
So I
Who are
put a
you
lot of
choosing?
thought. I put a
Yeah,
lot of
I'm.
thought into this. So he would never do it, but like Van Morrison would have been such a good
Mm,
choice. Also, I think the Doors are such an American band, like it has to be an American. So he probably, again, wouldn't be ideal, but just in terms of like voice and like artistry and such, like
sure.
persona, he would have
Yes.
been incredible.
Yes.
Um, so it's got to be an American. I feel like it's got to be a California boy. I'm going Kenny Loggins. Kenny Loggins fronting the Doors.
Interesting.
Um, no, everyone would
Huh.
hate it, yeah, but I would like it. It would please me. It would please an audience of one.
Yeah.
So really, it's no different than your pick.
Well, if I had to listen to one or the other, I would choose to listen to yours over mine. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah, interesting question. That was a good thinker. So that was good, even if I ended up taking it a different direction.
um, that will bring us to Got It on Vinyl. You got it on vinyl?
No, I don't. Not
Me
yet.
neither.
I'm
I know.
really, I'm
I don't
surprised by
have a
that.
single. I went back and like checked right before we started just to make sure I wasn't forgetting
Yeah.
anything. Don't have a single Doors album.
Yeah,
It's odd.
no. Waiting for the Sun, I'm going to be looking for now, and Other Voices. Those are the two that I want. That I would absolutely buy
I
those if I came across those.
I want all of the first six basically.
I'm going to get you American Prayer for Christmas.
Oh gosh,
Spoiler alert.
please don't. All right, well we'll have to work on that one. But that will bring us to better than Led Zeppelin? Question mark.
Mm. Let's see. Better than Led Zeppelin. So my list thus far, Zeppelin's number one, Stevie Nicks, My Morning Jacket. I think I had the Cars, and then I had Stone Temple Pilots, and then I'm going to put the Doors after Stone Temple Pilots.
Wow, we have a
Yeah.
new
Yeah.
last place band. Well, that's great for Stone Temple Pilots. I'm really
Yeah, I thought
happy.
you would be, yeah, you're not as
That's great
heartbroken when you
news.
hear who they're replacing. Yeah. So they're at the bottom for me.
Wow, wow. I'm legitimately shocked.
Really?
I thought you would love this band.
No, I don't know. I don't know what it is. If it would, I think that I don't like Jim Morrison. I think that they need a totally different singer, and and take all of Jim's crazy poetry stuff out, and I would enjoy it much, much more.
It's interesting. I didn't really talk about Ray Manzarek's book as much as I expected to throughout this, but Ray Manzarek is extremely protective of Jim Morrison
Mm,
and very much like, that, the horrible things he did wasn't really him. It was the drugs and all this stuff.
mm.
Very, he was a jerk, he really was. And I could see how it would influence someone to enjoy his work less. Doesn't for me, but um, my updated list is Stone Temple Pilots, number one.
Mm-hmm.
We've established this.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin remains number two. The Doors are not
Okay.
better than Led Zeppelin.
No.
The Doors are number three. I cannot
No.
believe they're. I
Stevie's
had to
gonna be
slot them above
heartbroken.
Stevie.
Oh
Um,
no.
I was reminded through this journey like how strong a lot of their catalog is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't count the last three albums. Those are not Doors albums, and those are in name only. The six albums when Jim Morrison was alive, I think it's stronger overall. It's a stronger body of work than Stevie's.
Okay. Interesting.
So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, I'm surprised as well that they ended up as high as they did. But that's where they are for
They
now.
won't stay
So
there. They won't last, I don't think.
no, no, God,
I think
no,
they'll
they'll
move
get
down
pushed
the
down.
list.
But this has been a lot of fun, and now, Adrian, we all got to know who we doing
Yeah,
next
who's
episode.
next? The next band that I chose, I is one that I enjoy and one that you enjoy, and we've listened to a lot and we've
Oh
talked about a
boy.
lot. Oh, who's it gonna be? I want us to break down and listen to Counting Crows.
Oh my gosh.
Yay!
This is big.
Woo! Yeah,
This is big. This is
yeah.
I've known this day was coming.
And you're gonna know way
Wow.
more than me, and have but I love this band and have a lot of fond memories of this
Yeah.
music, so
I
I really
mean,
want to get into it. Yeah.
Counting Crows is a very significant band for both Adrian and myself. And that's going to be a good episode. I can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be
Um,
great.
well, thank you, Adrian. This has been a lovely time. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Glad you
We
could
appreciate it. Yeah.
glad you could spend this time listening to us yak about the Doors. Let us know what in the comments. Like, do you like a Doors album that we panned? I can't imagine you do because the only ones we panned were the terrible ones. But
Well,
but you might, and we
they
want
can
to hear
thank
your
us for
opinions.
telling them not to listen to American Prayer.
Yes. So until next time, remember everyone's a critic and most people are DJs. Good night, Cape Girardeau. There will be no encore.